So we're here to talk about plastics.
Plastics.
The question's come up multiple times today to both of you. Why is there a panel on plastics at a climate conference? And I understand both of you had the chance to give this some thought, so I will let you. I'll let you opine and say.
Don't need to give it thought, but
so go for it.
Why don't you start?
Well, I'll start from the government perspective, just to give an overview. If we keep producing plastic and using plastic at the rate that we're currently using it, by 2030, we will produce 1.34 billion tons of climate emissions from plastic. Plastic production, plastic disposal. That's the equivalent of 300 coal-fired power plants online. So plastic comes from fossil fuels. It comes from petroleum. The extraction and the production of consumer goods from plastic is very energy intensive, water intensive, and obviously non-renewable resource intensive. I don't know, Sebastian, if you want to add to that.
I'll add a couple of factoids to that. 8.5 billion metric tons of plastic produced since it was industrialized. 5% of that was produced just this last year.
Yeah.
So if you think about what that means in the scaling of the growth of plastic production, it is off the charts. And it's not slowing down, it's accelerating, right? So what Rachel just said, that's 5% of carbon emissions are just through the production of virgin plastic. I'll go to a second layer, which is we talk about the biodiversity and ecosystem damage from plastics in the oceans. There will be more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050 by weight. Just think about that for a second. Half of turtles are being tested and they have plastic in their systems. Why does that matter for carbon? We talked about mangroves, we talked about coral reefs. You don't think they're impacted? These huge carbon sinks are impacted by the fact that there's plastic waste degrading into microplastics in the ocean. And then finally, plastic is a potential fuel source. People don't like it. It's not the best use of plastic waste, but the existing single-use plastics, where we heard earlier there are energy-intensive needs in the manufacture of cement and other things. If you can use plastic waste as a last resort, as an alternative to coal or other fossil fuels, that too helps with emissions. So there are layers upon layers of reasons to think about plastics as critical to the climate crisis.
All right, we're going to do the panel then.
Done.
So once again, we've got two different approaches. We've got a government approach, private approach. Let's just go down and hear. I mean, obviously, California has been a leader in this space for a very long time. There's some new regulations that have just come through that really changes the relationship between the plastic that's being produced, the producers that are making it, the distributors. Tell me a little bit about what's going on in California.
Well, so big picture, California is hoping to lead the nation on building a circular economy. And by that, we mean really moving away from the way we design and produce and consume consumer goods overall as a globe. But really, California is looking to lead in the space. We've made almost, and are currently making almost $750 million worth of investments from public funds, which I feel like is a very small number for the people that are here today, but for the state of California is a pretty big number. In investing in infrastructure, investing in new ideas, investing in innovation. Governor Newsom this year announced in his budget in January that we are moving to a zero waste plan, meaning that we are moving completely away from a linear economy and looking at the entirety of our system from design to end of life, to move away from producing any waste whatsoever. That doesn't mean that something doesn't come to an end of life, but really truly realizing the full resource of everything that we produce. One of the pieces of legislation, but this is one of 15 pieces of legislation that the legislature passed last year and Governor Newsom signed in the waste space, is SB 54, which is the first in the nation extended producer responsibility program for plastic packaging. And why that is so significant as part of this conversation is it really is designed to reduce plastic from the source. There's source reduction requirements, and then increase the amount that's recycled and reused, and designing an entire system. So when we talk about the public versus the private, extended producer responsibility is very much about building a partnership between public government agency and private industry to really say, what is the shared objective, which is defined by the legislation, and how do we drive together to meet that shared objective?
Sebastian, you want to talk a little bit about the exchange?
Yeah, I mean, look, let's acknowledge the fact that plastic is an amazing material, and there's a reason it's growing in use, right? As an alternative to using wood for packaging, it's pretty good, and there's carbon intensity if you used wood. But there's also a reason you see plastic waste on a beach and you don't see aluminum or cardboard or other things, because there's a value attached to those things. And when we talk about increasing recycling, I'm super excited about the EPR law in California, and Rachel and I were saying, we gotta talk. Because the reality is that the incentives don't exist for that infrastructure to be built out to create a circular model for plastics. There's $1.2 trillion of capital investment needed to create a truly circular model for plastics. And by the way, plastic's not infinitely recyclable, 4 or 5 times even the recyclable plastics. But in the US, recycling rates have gone down from 8 or 9% to below 5%. And that is both because of the growth and a lack of investment. So our approach is to say there is a way to do public-private partnership, and we've done this, by the way, in the Philippines, which is the legacy home of PCX, with the government to say the government sets parameters, goals around reduction, targets around reduction, and targets around taking responsibility for what remains. And then they enable the marketplace to take over to incentivize the right behaviors and the development of the missing infrastructure. So if you create those incentives and people can see a return that exists in building the next recycling plant or ensuring that the collection is happening in the right way and the sortation and all the other things that have to happen, that can create the flywheel effect of scaling. I think we heard it earlier, scaling and ecosystem, right? Those both came up. That's what it takes to scale and create an ecosystem effect that starts to solve the problem at an accelerated pace. And we're trying to facilitate that by creating trusted, transparent action in the short term, where you can pick from a range of project partners that get certified, tracked, and traced for the efficacy of what they're doing, and know what the price is that you're paying for it, and build it into your P&L.
If I could just add one thing. So a fully circular economy in the United States would mean about $4.5 trillion added to our economy by 2030 if we had a fully circular economy. Here in California, by 2030, we could realize $142 billion economic increase. So that is really quite literally making money out of what is otherwise trash. So as much as my role in government is to reduce waste and to implement the legislation and the vision that Governor Newsom has for our environment, my role also is to come to you and say there's an opportunity here to build a new economy, to build new economies, new industries, and that we are willing and interested partners to doing that. Dan and I had a conversation about whether New York or California was going to win, and I'm here to tell you California is going to win. We're going to do what we do best. We're going to innovate in this space. And so the 15 pieces of legislation that passed this year are everything from our first of its kind EPR program for plastic packaging, but we're also doing batteries. We're also looking at battery embedded products, which I know a lot of you are very familiar with. And all of this requires a lot of infrastructure and a lot of innovation of how do we design our products for the recovery of those materials, and how do we design our products for the maximum life cycle. So the public-private partnership is going to be absolutely critical to the success of implementation of all of this legislation, but also critical to realizing the economic benefit of it.
So both of you mentioned the incentives need to be put in place to have these markets form. It sounds like there's tremendous economic upside, but there's still steps that need to be taken in order for that to form. Like what, it's got to be more complicated than just raising the deposit on a bottle, because we tried that.
Yeah.
So what are some of those other things that need to happen, both from government and then on the business side?
Do you want to start?
Me first. So I would say, first and foremost, the state of California, since the inception of our beverage container recycling program, has recycled, I want to say it's something like 500 billion beverage containers because of that deposit. So the deposit is a really effective tool, and it created an incentive for that infrastructure to grow. But what what we've learned in the almost 40 years since that first recycling program is that there are better models, and allowing industry to build their own model for material use and development and design and then recovery has the potential to be far more effective than a, say, government-run program where I'm dictating all of the rules to an industry who knows way better than I do how to best recover its materials.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to start by saying, look, it's really important. I think this came up in other contexts today. This is a really complicated problem, and there is no silver bullet, right? And so it really takes sort of a portfolio of activities, public and private, but also at all levels of the stack, meaning reduction, reuse, recycling, and then accounting for the end-of-life plastics. All of that has to be happening simultaneously, and the investment needs to be across all of it. The problem is, again, that the economic incentives, you know, I'm very proud of you guys having compostable cups, doesn't matter. They're all getting thrown in. By the way, you guys are drinking them and you're throwing them on a recycling bin. All you're doing is screwing up the recycling because they're not recyclable. They're compostable and only in a certain way. So if you put it in your green bin, it also won't work. Because the infrastructure is not there, right?
This is what frustrates people, right?
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
this is what
told me
undermines.
to recycle, and now I'm hearing that everything I put in the recycling bin isn't being recycled.
Exactly.
Like, it's mad.
And so this is why the ecosystem approach that is market-based matters so much. I'm going to give you a very specific example. We have a partner in Thailand, big industrial waste management company, built this beautiful recycling center with solar panels on top of it and massive capacity. They actually have demand from branded corporations that want to take the recycled pellets and use it to basically produce recycled water bottles and other things. They're shuttering the plant. They're shuttering the plant because they don't have inputs. They're at 15% capacity utilization because the source waste material isn't coming to them. And trust me, Thailand is full of plastic waste. But the infrastructure and the programs and the projects to collect that waste, sort it, clean it, prep it for the recycling aren't sufficient, and they're not at scale. So if you create the right, again, we're going to keep saying public-private partnership, but if you create the right frameworks that incentivize the funding of the full value chain required to deliver on this circular model, and it gets funded through corporations. It's great that consumers have deposits that they can collect. We can't count on the consumer to solve this problem on their own. Right. The companies need to be responsible, and many of them are doing it voluntarily with us. I wanted to put a Pepsi video up here, but they haven't publicly released it. They're getting a lot of promotional brand value out of saying, we're doing this before you mandate it, right? We're going to fund these projects, which, by the way, include female micro-entrepreneurs getting supplemental income for collecting plastic from the local community and then sending it to a recycling center. We need more of that activity. It's too small scale, and it needs greater funding, and it needs to be globalized. And then we'll get to a more balanced model, and that's really what needs to happen.
That's what we're seeing right now as California has embarked on our organics recycling program. As many of you, I'm sure, who live here in California are now putting your food waste in your green bin, and your local government is now trying to figure out how to best utilize that. The legislation, actually, one of the unique things that it did for the first time in recycling law in California is it required local governments to procure a certain amount of the byproduct or the recycled product from the waste stream that they create, and it's really spurred a market here in California. We have what is called co-digestion as one of the solutions. So basically, organic waste goes to a wastewater treatment plant, and right there, located on the wastewater treatment plant, is an organics digestion plant that utilizes that same material or the organics material from your green bin. And what ends up happening is then that creates methane gas, which goes into our natural gas, our renewable natural gas pipelines. And the local government's going to get credit for that. So what that did was it created a market for this kind of technology. Here in California, we now have the largest co-digestion plant in all of North America located in Rialto. But one of the challenges is they built it, and now will they come? So where is the organic waste coming from? How do we ensure that they have enough supply so that they can contract for the gas that they're selling? And that's really the role that government plays. So we're on the front end helping set up some of the structure and the legislation that gives the regulatory certainty to the market as to how a particular government entity is going to operate. And then we're in there with the companies. This particular company, Energia, we've given them loans for some of their equipment, and we are working with the local governments in Southern California to ensure that the waste stream is getting there. So there are, to create a fully circular system, the linear system is very easy. It's very one-dimensional. You create the product, you use the product, you dispose of the product. And people make money in there. That's not my specialty, but people make money in there. The circular system, in order for it to work, you have to have the complete chain, from creation to use to recycling to reuse, in order for any of the pieces to work. And so as we embark in our plastics packaging and some of our other extended producer responsibility programs, product stewardship programs in California, we're seeing this, and we're driving all of our policy into that circular model, but also recognize that we have a role to play to ensure that when we have this expectation on industry, that we are there partnering and helping overcome those challenges. So that's the part where we don't just create the law, we have to be there to help implement.
Yeah, I think that what I hear both of you saying is that in the past, we sort of thought recycling was the end of the process, and it's not, can't be, because that's not a business, it's not sustainable. Something needs to happen after it gets recycled, and and businesses are the best people to then reuse that and turn that into a product. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking to us. I think we know why we're talking about plastics now. And thank you all. Can we give them a hand?
Thanks.